1.2 million US dollars or Australian dollars to be spent on the whole project. Why is Australia doing this at this particular time?
I think there's two reasons for this. It started off as an election promise to have a look at the white paper on Australian foreign policy, and it seemed like you just had submissions and it would be fairly straightforward. When there was commissioned, the idea would be, I think, that Hillary Clinton would be in the White House and it would be business as usual. And then when Donald Trump was elected, a crisis became evident to think through our foreign policy, and with a crisis came an opportunity. So I think the government has responded, particularly the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Bishop, to bring all the diplomats back to give the expert opinion. It's not just what's going on in America, but it's also fracturing across the alliance in Europe, the concerns about Asia. Mm-hmm. So if you think about Australian foreign policy, the three major places for our diplomats, our three major points of diplomatic interest are Washington, Beijing and Jakarta. So sending back the Ambassador Jan Adams from China is an important step. It also has to keep in mind that the head of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade was the ex-ambassador from China, that's Francis Adamson. So I think there's a genuine concern that we've seen the rise of China. China continues to rise, the decline of the US, and Trump exemplifies this crisis that we need to bring our expert back to sort of look at the crisis and what the opportunities present.
Sure. Now this is the third foreign policy white paper, right, that's going to come out. The last time was 2003, almost 14 years ago. When you look at the last white paper, what do you think are the possible new directions that Australia might be looking at now?
I think the Australian foreign policy has relied on the American alliance, and therefore it hasn't had to think through too difficultly what to do in foreign policy. Mm-hmm. So this is the first time someone is saying, cynics are saying, it's the first time we have to take seriously our own foreign policy because it's been too reliant on America. We've been too tied to the American alliance. So the 2003 one was like that. It came in with the Howard government. It was an argument that we didn't have to choose between our economic trade with China or with our strategic alliance with America. Now we're struck with the problem that the value systems are shifting. We were fairly sure over those 13 years that what Australia followed was the American notion of a law-based order or a rules-based order. Now what we find with Donald Trump is that he has abandoned the rules-based order for what could be called might is right, and that gives Australia real problems.
Yeah, I mean, we all remember this phone call that Malcolm Turnbull had with Donald Trump. We understand that it's about the agreement to relocate the refugees that have been stranded on islands near Australia. Now, how do you also mention this changing dynamic of a relationship between Australia and the United States? Where do you think Australia has to go from now? Because since you had this security treaty with the United States since the 1950s, you have been pretty comfortable, right? But yes. Now Donald Trump, not just to Australia, but also to other countries, for instance, Japan and the NATO countries, you have to take a bigger share of your responsibility.
So I think there's a genuine concern that's going on in Australia, and that's been evident in the release of documents that look at and debate this issue in Australia around the foreign policy. Mm-hmm. Some are saying that we have to look completely differently at Australian foreign policy. So ex-Prime Minister Keating, for example, said it's a new opportunity to rethink the American alliance. And there's a number of people who line up with him. There's a second group of people who line up to say, well, the American alliance is the bedrock of our position, it's been there ever since, and that we will ride out the Trump period and keep the bedrock going. So there's the two lines that are happening in Australian foreign policy, which is that...
Which line is going to be stronger, you think?
The problem we face, I think, is that the government doesn't want to break with the American alliance.
And probably it's not realistic at this moment either.
It's not realistic. But it does face this real conundrum that the American alliance was based on this rules-based order. So that throws into a whole series of conundrums for us. Firstly, we were strongly supporting of the American position on the Trade-Pacific Partnership because that was a means of enmeshing China into a rules-based order. So we're trying to lure China into this rules-based order.
And now
it's gone.
Donald Trump, now it's gone. Let's also talk about this very different dynamic concerning China. I mean, since 2003, Australia's trade relationship with China has also changed dramatically, right?
That's right.
Now, China is, I would say, the biggest trade partner
It
with
is
Australia.
Australia's biggest trade partner.
Yeah, and Australia also jumped into to be a founding member of the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So how is Australia going to adapt to the presence of China, the growing presence?
Well, this is the issue it faces, is that as the rules-based order is gone and that Trump is saying that he will assert foreign policy in a different means, Australia's caught two things. One is trade, whether it would agree and come in with China on a rules-based order, because China is looking towards that process and that it's talked about trade in those terms. So Australia is tempted to go down this path because it's the principles. And it's the principles that President Xi has been talking about, guiding a rules-based system.
Yes.
So we're tempted to go that way. But the other way is that the old containment of China still remains, because some people are talking about an alliance between Australia, Japan, India, and Australia, a four-way alliance to contain China. So you're caught between this containment position, which has been there a long time, and the fact that we are the #1 trading partner with China.
Yeah.
We have 150,000 Chinese students there every year.
You have a big headache.
We have a big headache.
Well, I hope all these ambassadors, diplomats will help solve that problem.
Yeah.